right? Late in that Texans games, they lost wide receiver Will Fuller to an ACL injury. They add Broncos receiver Demaryius Thomas. So, Eric, two teams in contention here, both adding veteran wide receivers. Which player is going to make the biggest impact for their new team?
I actually have to believe that Golden Tate will make the biggest difference because in Philadelphia, you feel like the wheels are spinning and they just can't gain traction. And once they do, they're going to take off. I felt, and you felt, that a running back was still something that they very much needed, and they didn't really solve that problem. However, getting Carson Wentz another weapon, I mean, don't forget, Alshon Jeffrey, Jordan Matthews has come back in, and then the play of Nelson Aguilar has been really well received this year in Philadelphia. So to add Golden Tate, I feel like they're just adding weapons downfield for Wentz to be able to move the ball. They've got Zach Ertz, of course, and even their backup tight end has played really well. So it just feels like they're gearing up for a big offensive explosion. And I hope that happens for the remainder of the year because although they got that win in Jacksonville last week, they still need a whole lot more wins to keep pace with those Redskins. I don't think Demaryius Thomas to the Texans is a bad move by any stretch, but I just don't see that being as impactful because it's Will Fuller was having a good year. So it's kind of you lose one, you gain one, and they've already got a superstar in DeAndre Hopkins there. I feel like it's just a replacement for what they just lost to injury, whereas the Eagles, it's like adding another piece. So I think the greatest impact of the two, at least on this season, is Golden Tate.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, although I think both these teams, it's a kind of puzzling move on both their parts because neither one of these guys fills a role these teams I feel like they need. I feel like what's been missing from Philadelphia is that deep vertical threat or the threat that even a guy like Torrey Smith brought to that team last year. They lost Mike Wallace. They've really not had the guy that can sort of take the top off the defense, so they do everything either just outside the numbers or it's across the middle, nothing deep. And I feel like that's really what Golden Tate's role is, sort of the same with Demaryius Thomas. He's not going to be able to do what Will Fuller did for this team. Will Fuller was just a speed guy, and you saw it on display on Thursday night that he can run through coverage and get himself open. And you look at the numbers that he put up with Watson, especially when Cutie was off the field for this team. I mean, Will Fuller was having some phenomenal games with Deshaun Watson at the quarterback position. So I feel like Golden Tate's move will probably have more of a positive impact on the offense. And not that Demaryius won't, but I feel like the roles that they brought them into play, I feel like they're not quite the perfect fit. I think a guy like Deshaun Jackson coming back to Philadelphia or Houston making the move, that would have made a lot more sense for what their team needs actually were.
Yeah, I think those are great points. So, Justin, I did want to ask you real quick because, you know, the Eagles and the Broncos are both our teams, but let's flip that from the NFC perspective to the Lions. Do you feel in any way that this is the Lions or the Broncos sort of looking ahead to next season, seeing that they got rid of two pieces on their offense, that the Broncos are 3-5, the Lions are 3-4? I don't feel like they should be giving away pieces like a DT or a Golden Tate. Do you feel like this is them sort of giving up on the year?
Well, I think Denver's situation is a little bit different. Demaryius has a cap number next year of over $17 million, and he would have some dead money if they'd want to cut him. And they drafted Cortland Sutton in the second round, and he, from training camp on, has really shown himself as a guy that's come along a lot faster in the process than they thought. So I think they want to get Cortland Sutton on the field. He's basically in the Denver market seen as the younger DT. The Lions are what puzzles me. Yeah, they're 3-4. They're fourth place in that NFC North division, but the Bears are leading and they're only 4-3. And just last week, you had the Lions go out and acquire Snacks Harrison from the Giants to fix their run defense, and they lose a game, and immediately they go out and they trade one of their top offensive weapons on a weekend where we saw the Packers lose and the Vikings lose. So it's not like they lost a ton of ground. So if I'm a Lions fan, I'm sort of confused at what they're doing, Eric. I'm not really sure because I feel like I'm getting two opposing views here. Now, they do have a young wide receiver similar to Denver and Kenny Golladay, who they've been using more and more, that maybe they want to get him more exposure, more snaps. But Eric, do you think that's sending a bad message to Lions fans of where this team actually is, that even at 3-4, they don't feel like they're in the mix?
Yep. That's exactly right. And that's kind of what I was hoping you would get at, because I felt the same way. You know, you had the losses in the division up ahead of them. Chicago had a hot start, but now they've cooled off a little bit. So you're the Lions at 3-4, and you feel like if you just string together a couple of good weeks, you could be right back in the mix. And then you never know. Once you get to Thanksgiving games and beyond, you know, the Lions have tended to be a little bit of a tougher out come December for that NFC division that they're in. So, yeah, it was confusing to me. And if I'm Golden Tate, I've got to be loving life, because now I'm going to a team that's coming off of a Super Bowl. And yes, I know that they're just 500 and they're looking up at the Redskins. But if this is the message that Detroit is sending, then if I'm Golden Tate, I'm happier in Philly.
Well, they'll definitely have some questions to answer in Detroit. Another team that's going to have a question to answer in the offseason appears to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Because once again, we saw the Buccaneers and their quarterback, Jameis Winston, sort of have a meltdown on Sunday after his fourth interception, which was actually a pick six. Jameis was benched, once again, it feels like, in favor of Ryan Fitzpatrick, who turned into Fitzmagic again, leading a charge and a comeback against the Bengals. They ultimately fell short, but it'll be Fitzpatrick getting the start in Carolina. So, Eric, this is a situation that seems to just be getting uglier and uglier. We've seen throughout just this year that Ryan Fitzpatrick can have those Fitzmagic moments. He also goes into Fitztragic mode where he doesn't look very good either. You think back to that game they went into Chicago and just got totally annihilated and actually got Fitzpatrick benched for Jameis Winston. So it feels like we've seen this story with Fitzpatrick where we're never sure what we're going to get. So do you think the Bucs will turn back to Winston at some point this year where he can maybe save his career there, or do you think his fate's already sealed in Tampa?
No, Jameis Winston's time in Tampa Bay is coming to a close. I think they'll stick with Fitzpatrick for the rest of the year, especially as you get into Week 11, Week 12. You can't be going back and forth. I don't think, and you and I talked about this after Week 2 and 3, we were wondering, after the rapid reaction of the hot start in Tampa, what were they going to do when Jameis Winston comes back? I never felt like Fitzpatrick was the long-term answer, and I still don't, but he's definitely the answer for the remainder of this year, and they've got to figure out a plan for Jameis Winston. I'm a little surprised that he didn't end up on a New York Giants team or even a Jacksonville Jaguars team as possibly a backup who's right there ready to go if Blake Bortles bites the dust again, which we all know that he will. I'm surprised that he didn't get moved, but it didn't happen. Therefore, I think he rides the pine for the rest of the year in Tampa Bay, and they look to do something later on. This is Fitzpatrick's team for the rest of this year, but moving forward, neither one of these guys is the franchise answer for this team, and you see it by the big peaks and valleys that both of them have. I know Fitzpatrick can be Fitzmagic, but he's also going to be Fitztragic. You know that's what you're getting from him, but when you put in a star like Jameis Winston and he gives you 4 interceptions, that's not going to work either.
I totally have complete confidence that Ryan Fitzpatrick will find his way back to the bench, just because I think he'll have a meltdown game so bad that they will turn back to Jameis, but I think his fate's already sealed. I think Tampa has to go into this draft with the idea that they're going to go out and get a quarterback. The fact that a team like the Giants or the Jacksonville Jaguars didn't go out and make a move for a guy that you know Tampa would probably have taken anything for at this point just to try to recoup some of his value shows that even around the league, the opinions of him are pretty low, and he's going to have a rough time even if he leaves Tampa trying to go to another team and finding a starting job again. It's going to be on a bad team that maybe drafts a rookie and wants to take their time with him. This is a huge fall for a guy that was a number 1 pick. And again, this was a guy 2 years ago. There was national analysts talking about him being an MVP candidate, and now he can't beat Ryan Fitzpatrick. So Jameis Winston didn't get traded at the deadline on Tuesday. Tampa decides not to make a move. One team that did make a move with their personnel on Monday was the Cleveland Browns. They have finally had enough of head coach Hue Jackson, and apparently they decided to give him some company, and offensive coordinator Todd Haley, they sent both packing. Hue Jackson just 3-36-1. Eric, we've joked about Hue Jackson even keeping his job with that 1-31 record, and we'd even talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that he had doubled his win total, that maybe the Cleveland Browns were going to sign him to an extension, just joking around. But it turns out that this new regime, when they brought in John Dorsey, did not really want to keep Hue Jackson. Owner Jimmy Haslam talked them into giving it a try. It looked like after this Steelers game that they had regressed enough from week 1 where they had tied to getting blown out in Pittsburgh. and they'd had enough of the Hue Jackson era. It is now over. But Eric, was this the right time with this young Browns team, specifically with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, to make this move?
This might sound silly, but I'm going to defend Hue Jackson here for a minute. Look, as far as OC...
Whoa.
Yeah, I know.
You're going to defend Hue?
Yes, I am, and I'll tell you why. As far as offensive coordinator, Todd Haley, I think that guy needs to be out of the NFL. He's now run his course just about every team.
Through half the league.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's been with half the league, so he's done. No one should rehire Todd Haley. It's a little bit crazy with him. Now, with Hue Jackson... The guy goes 0-16, doesn't get fired. The guy goes 1-15, doesn't get fired. The guy now this year, we've talked about the fact that it seems like the Browns are at least competitive in every game that they play. The regime that's come in from the GM and all that, they've put a good roster around Hue Jackson, but now you're not going to give him time to mesh these guys together and succeed. Justin, they've been to 4 overtime games. They could have won a lot of those games. So like you said, they double their win total. They've got 2 wins, 5 losses, and a tie. A lot of those losses could have been wins if they just had better, and maybe some people will say, hey, Eric, if they had better coaching, those would have been wins. But you're 8 games into a season for a head coach who's been a perennial junk box, and now he's got some things to work with, and you're going to let him go halfway through the season? I don't agree with this. I really don't, because if they were going to get rid of him, they should have just done it at the beginning of the year. Now you've got a team that's in rebuild mode and you're gaining progress on I think they're still going to win 3 or 4 ball games this year because they've been so close in a lot of these games. I think they're going to get to the over that we talked about, that 6th win, that 7th win. I really do. So you're going to fire a head coach halfway through the season and put your whole team in disarray? And that makes this year a total loss. You've got Baker Mayfield coming into his own. You've got him trying to gel with the other players there. You've got a defense that's trying as hard as they can. I know Greg Williams is pretty excited about what his roles might be. But look, dumb timing. It tells me that Haslam and the regime that's at GM, and they just said, okay, we're going to try it out. They never really had intentions to make this work, and so I think they just called it a lost year, and I think that's dumb.
The timing of it definitely just feels awkward. It feels like when Hue was 1-31, and you're going to draft a quarterback with the first pick in the draft, that you would have went ahead and brought in your new coaching regime and just did it all right there, and not had this now in the middle of the season, and you've now fired the head coach, which was known as more of an offensive-minded head coach, and his offensive coordinator. And now you're going to be bringing up a guy that doesn't have that kind of experience. That's just puzzling to me. It felt like they should have just dumped Hue then when he could only win 1 game in 2 years. Even with bad teams, we've seen them be able to win a couple games a year, and they could do nothing in Cleveland. So, yeah, the timing of it for me just feels like it's just the wrong time. I would have rather seen them fire Todd Haley, let Hue Jackson do more of the play calling, and then if they couldn't get it fixed, then make the change at the end of the year. I know this may give them a head start on maybe looking for a coach or putting it out there if they do want a guy like Lincoln Riley, although he seems to say that the NFL not right now, but there's a guy that he coached in college that's the quarterback of this team, so you'd have to think that there's some connections there. But it'll be interesting how this plays out and who they go after at this point, because you can't have all this turnover, Eric, with this young of a football team. That's just never going to work. So we'll see if the Browns can actually get this right. Let's do one more NFL question here off of week 8. So there was some pretty darn good catches that we saw. You had Odell Beckham's one-hander across the middle against Washington. You had Adam Thielen's two-handed catch over P.J. Williams on Sunday night. And then you had DeAndre Hopkins catch on Thursday night with one hand in his scrotum. So, Eric, which was the better catch?
Well, I was going to go with Odell Beckham Jr. because that was a catch that he had to have at the moment that they needed it most, although what did it really matter, right? But you made the other catch with DeAndre Hopkins, and I watched the game, and I didn't even think about it that way. You make that catch sound so attractive. I'm going to have to go with that one. So I'm going to go Hopkins first. Odell Beckham Jr. was definitely second. Thielen's catch was amazing, but Thielen is probably one of the most underrated or underknown and underappreciated receivers in this league. His catch over the helmet was phenomenal, but it's third place in this list.
Poor Hopkins' catch didn't even count. That's the bad thing. It was probably the catch of maybe the year so far, and it didn't even count because of the offensive PI they called. And it's It's another thing that bothers me. We talked about it, you and I, years and years ago with the whole Dez Bryant catch at Green Bay that was called not a catch, that the NFL sort of robbed some of these great plays with just petty calls that maybe don't need to be called at that moment of these odd rules. But yeah, all three were great catches, but I had to throw that one in there for you. So Eric, let's talk about a little